Hey guys, welcome back to Builds by Maz. In this video, I'll show you how to add coverings to your basement posts to make them look like this. This is a fairly easy method, and I use inexpensive materials, but it made a big difference to these support columns and gives the whole basement a finished look. Let's get started. For this project, I'm just using basic 8-inch wide common board from Home Depot. Of course, you can use nicer wood, but I wanted to keep this budget friendly. To make the pine look a little bit better, I tested out a bunch of different stain colors that I already had in my workshop. It's always a good idea to test your stain colors first, and this side of the board will face the inside of the post, so we're not going to waste this piece of wood. In the end, I chose this dark walnut stain, and I'll have a link to it down below. The first thing I needed to do was trim these boards down to size. They didn't stand fully upright in my basement, so I cut off the ends and then refit them. It doesn't have to be perfect here because I'm going to put a covering over the top and bottom. I cut out 4 boards and made sure they all fit in place, and this gave me a basic idea of how these columns were going to look. I then set my table saw to a 45-degree angle so I could miter the edges. This will give the whole column a cleaner and more unified look. I did this along one edge for all 4 boards, and you can see in this cross section that one side has the 45-degree angled cut, and now I need to do the same thing on the other side. I flipped the boards over, adjusted my table saw, and cut down the other side. Not only will this miter the second edge, it'll also make sure all 4 boards are exactly the same width. I then measured the width of the inside edge of the board from here to here. That came out to be 5.5 inches. For comparison, my basement posts are 3.5 inches in diameter, which is a pretty standard size. I'm using a basic 2x4 as a spacer, which I cut to be 5.5 inches long. That way, it'll perfectly fit along the inside edge of my common board. Now you want to make sure to position the 2x4 so that it's below this gap in the top of the column. I measured the distance from the top of the ceiling and then transferred that to my piece of lumber. I'll be securing everything using Title Bond 3 wood glue. This stuff is super strong and will make sure you have a lasting connection. After applying a generous amount of the glue, I positioned the 2x4 in place and then clamped it down tightly. I glued on 2 more of these 2x4 pieces, one in the middle and one on the other end. I repeated this process for the next side of the column, but I can't put the 2x4s in the same spots, because when I try to connect the pieces, the 2x4s will get in the way of each other. So instead, I need to offset it a little bit. But besides that, it's the same process, and I glued on 3 2x4s. Note that you only need to do this for 2 sides of the column. I left everything to sit for a few hours while it dried, and then I could remove all the clamps. I then added in the 3rd side of the column, and as I mentioned, this is the piece that I tested all the stains on, but none of this will be visible. I then applied wood glue all along the mitered edges of these 3 boards, making sure to spread it out evenly. I also applied an additional amount where the bottoms of these 2x4s will be touching the adjacent board, giving me an additional connection point. I then folded up the sides to create 3 sides of the column, and used various clamps to hold everything together. The 2x4 spacers really come in handy here because I could put a lot of pressure on the clamps. And the more clamps you have, the easier this is. You really want to try to line up the mitered edges of all 3 boards as close as you can. After giving that time to dry and removing the clamps, if you still have any gaps in your edges like this right here, you can use a bit of wood filler to just fill that in. I then sanded everything down, making sure every side was smooth, and this also removes any of the excess wood filler. With that complete, I could slide the whole thing onto the basement post, and the final piece of common board will attach from the other side like this. Now this whole thing is still really loose, so what I need to do is use some heavy duty construction adhesive to attach these 2x4 spacers to the actual post. I marked off right where the 2x4s went past the post, so I knew where to apply the construction adhesive. I'm using this Loctite PL Premium construction adhesive. This has a lot of holding power, and I've used it for a lot of projects with good success. I applied a generous amount to all the 2x4 spacers wherever they'll be in contact with the metal post. After lifting this covering back into place, I pulled it hard from the back side to make sure it had a good connection. I'll also install some shims into the gap along this left edge to make sure the adhesive is pressed firmly against this area on the right side. These are just basic wood shims, but they're going to really tighten everything up and prevent any additional movement while the construction adhesive cures. I applied wood glue to the 2 remaining exposed mitered edges, which will hold the final board in place. I set it up and then clamped everything down and left it to sit overnight. Using more clamps here will help you minimize any gaps along the edges, but if any do remain, you can once again fill it in with wood filler. I did all these steps for the 3 basement posts that I wanted covered, doing each one individually one at a time. I then hung up a protective covering around all 3 of them. That way I could sand down the final boards and remove any excess wood filler without getting dust all throughout my basement. Once that was done, I removed the tarps and applied some of this pre-stained wood conditioner. That will help the actual stain absorb into the wood more evenly. I then applied some of that dark walnut stain that I picked out earlier. I did one side at a time, applying a generous coat of the stain and then wiping off any excess before it had time to dry. This is an important step to make sure you get even coverage without any blotching. I repeated that process for the other 3 sides of the post covering and then moved on to the next post. The great thing about this is you can use whatever stain color you want that works best for your own space. I finished staining all the columns and gave them time to dry, and then moved on to adding column tops and bases. Using 10-inch common board this time, I cut out 5-inch strips for the base coverings and 3-inch strips for the tops. I mitered both edges of these at 45 degrees so they'll be able to join around the column. After a light sanding, I again applied pre-stained wood conditioner and then a coat of that same dark walnut stain. After a quick test fit, I applied wood glue to the backside to permanently fix them in place. I then used clamps to hold them while the glue dried. For the tops, I also used wood glue, but instead of fighting gravity with the clamps, I just used a single brad nail to hold it while the glue dried. But with those all installed, that wrapped up this project, and these column covers were complete. Overall, this was a pretty inexpensive project, and it was a great way to update our basement, giving everything a completed look. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you want to see more home improvement projects like this, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you next time.